They thought she didn't belong. They watched her every move, filed complaints, and then called the cops. What they didn't know was that the woman they targeted ran the entire sheriff's department. Imagine buying the home you've worked your whole life for, finally turning the key, expecting peace, only to realize that the welcome mat isn't really out for you. That was the reality for Sheridan Cole, a 44-year-old woman who had spent over 2 decades serving her county. She wasn't just a professional. She was the county's elected sheriff, respected by colleagues and feared by criminals. But to the neighbors on Maple Glen Drive and Brookhaven Estates, Florida, none of that mattered the moment she pulled her moving truck up to her new driveway. The sun was brutal that Saturday morning. The air shimmered above the blacktop as Sheridan stepped out in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. She looked at the small 2-story brick home with its neat lawn and tall oak tree shading the corner. It was exactly what she had wanted: quiet, comfortable. Somewhere she could finally relax after years of chasing warrants, late-night raids, and courtroom testimony. As she carried boxes from the truck, she noticed blinds twitching. People were watching. Across the street, a man watering his lawn paused, hose still running, staring longer than was polite. On the porch next door, a woman leaned against the railing, phone in hand, whispering into it while never looking away from Sheridan. Sheridan felt it, eyes tracking her every move. "Guess introductions can wait," she muttered to herself, shifting the weight of the box. She wasn't naive. She'd seen that look before when she walked into certain restaurants in uniform, when she responded to calls in neighborhoods where her authority was quietly questioned before she even spoke. But she told herself this was different. This was her home now. By noon, the moving truck was empty, and Sheridan sat on the tailgate, drinking water. Sweat dripped down her temple, but she felt a small satisfaction. She had done most of the lifting herself. That was her way. No shortcuts, no excuses. She glanced around again. Most neighbors had disappeared indoors, but the blinds still shifted whenever she looked up. The first person to speak was an older man walking his dog. He slowed as he approached, tugging gently on the leash. "You moving in here?" he asked, his voice flat. "Yes, sir," Sheridan said, standing and offering a polite smile. "Name's Sheridan Cole. Just got the keys this week." The man didn't smile back. He gave a small nod, muttered welcome, and kept walking. Sheridan exhaled, watching him disappear down the street. Later that afternoon, a white SUV rolled up. Tess stepped Clifford Branson, a man in his late 50s with neatly combed silver hair and a golf shirt tucked too tightly into khakis. His handshake was firm, but his eyes never quite warmed. "I'm Clifford," he announced, "president of the HOA here. Thought I'd stop by too, make sure you had everything you needed." "Appreciate that," Sheridan said evenly, still settling in, "but I'll get there." Clifford's eyes scanned her yard, the driveway, the recycling bin near the curb. "We like to keep things in order around here. Bins out no earlier than 6 p.m. the night before collection, lawns cut weekly. Things like that." Sheridan caught the subtext. It wasn't a welcome, it was a warning. "Understood," she replied. He gave a tight smile, patted the hood of her car like it was his own, and left without another word. Sheridan stood there, arms crossed, feeling the weight of the encounter. She had dealt with men like him before, the type who spoke softly but carried rules like weapons. That night, unpacking boxes in her living room, Sheridan thought about her new neighbors. She wanted to believe things would settle once people realized she was just another homeowner who paid her dues like anyone else. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew the stares and clipped conversations weren't just curiosity. She pulled back the curtain, looking at the street lined with identical houses, trimmed hedges, and parked SUVs. From across the way, she caught Sight of the same woman from earlier, still standing on her porch, still staring. Sheridan let the curtain fall. "Some folks don't need a reason," she whispered. "They'll find one anyway." She turned off the light, convincing herself tomorrow would be better. But the truth was, tomorrow would only dig the first cracks into the foundation of her new life there. The next morning, Sheridan woke early. Years of law enforcement had wired her body to rise before dawn. She brewed coffee, stepped onto her porch, and let the cool morning air hit her face. For a brief moment, she thought maybe she had overreacted the day before. Maybe the stares were nothing more than curiosity about a new neighbor. But then she noticed the same man with the dog, this time crossing the street deliberately slower, his head turning just enough to glance at her house before looking away. A silver sedan rolled past, its driver slowing down more than necessary, peering through the passenger window. Sheridan raised her coffee cup in a small gesture of acknowledgement, but the driver quickly accelerated. Inside, she set her cup down and muttered, "Yep, still a show." By 7, she was in uniform, preparing to head into the sheriff's office. Her badge caught the light as she pinned it, a routine that usually gave her confidence. Yet this morning, as she adjusted her belt, she wondered what her neighbors would think seeing her leave the driveway dressed like that. She grabbed her keys and stepped outside. Sure enough, across the street, 2 women stood near a mailbox, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when Sheridan locked her car. Their eyes followed her until she drove out of sight. Later that day, when she returned, her neighbor from next door, the woman who had been on the porch with her phone, was outside trimming her hedges. Sheridan waved politely. "Afternoon, Sheridan." Called. The woman paused, holding the clippers mid-air. She replied without looking up and resumed clipping. Sheridan stood there for a second before heading inside. She'd seen enough body language in interviews to know when someone didn't want to engage. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, Sheridan sat at her dining table surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. She heard voices drifting through her open window, neighbors chatting just loud enough to carry, "I don't know. She's always leaving before sunrise and back late at night. I mean, what does she even do? Could be anything. People don't just keep hours like that unless something's off." Sheridan closed the window, her jaw tightening. She had heard worse in her career, but hearing it outside her own home felt different. She wanted to step outside, announce herself, tell them she was Sheriff Sheridan Cole of Seminole County, but she held back. She didn't owe anyone an explanation for her life. 2 days later, while unloading groceries from her car, a teenager from down the street stopped and asked bluntly, "Are you renting or buying?" "Buying," Sheridan replied. The boy nodded like he had gathered intel, then jogged off to a group of friends waiting at the corner. Sheridan shook her head. "Guess word spreads fast around here." The tension grew more noticeable when she realized nobody had come by with a pie. No one had dropped off a welcome to the neighborhood card. Not even the polite but shallow gestures common in suburban communities. Instead, she got side glances, cut-off conversations, and the constant feeling of being monitored. One night, a squad car rolled slowly past her house. Sheridan happened to be outside with her trash. The officer behind the wheel spotted her, hesitated, then gave a quick wave before driving off. Sheridan frowned, and there was no reason for a patrol to circle this cul-de-sac. She knew her deputy's routes. That wasn't one of them. Back inside, she sat at the kitchen counter, tapping her fingers on the granite. Something was brewing. She had seen this progression before in neighborhoods where gossip turned into suspicion, suspicion into complaints, and complaints into something worse. Why should home feel like work? She asked herself quietly. For years, she had carried the burden of calming disputes, solving crimes, and standing tall under scrutiny. All she wanted now was to come home and be plain old Sheridan. But it was clear her neighbors weren't going to allow that. The small signs piled up, cars slowing near her driveway. A pair of men she didn't recognize standing at the corner, pointing at her house before walking away. Her recycling bin nudged, just slightly out of line, like someone had checked to see what she tossed out by the end of the week. Sheridan sat in her living room, uniform draped over the chair, and whispered, "They want a story about me. They'll make one if they don't get it." She wasn't afraid. She had faced worse in alleys, motels, and courtrooms. But there was something more personal about this. This wasn't a case she could clock out from. This was her sanctuary, and it was being chipped away piece by piece. But the neighbors weren't done. The whispers were about to reach the HOA president. And once Clifford Branson got involved, the situation would shift from quiet suspicion to calculated action. Clifford Branson prided himself on keeping Brookhaven Estates orderly. He was the type of man who measured his lawn stripes like they were military drills, who wrote reminders on his calendar about fertilizer schedules, who believed that if you kept the neighborhood controlled, you could keep it respectable. To him, rules weren't just guidelines, they were the armor that protected the image of the community. When the first call about Sheridan landed on his desk, well, technically, his email inbox, he didn't think much of it. The message was short. "There's a woman at 1432 Maple Glen who comes and goes at strange hours. I don't know what she's up to. Might want to keep an eye." Clifford leaned back in his office chair, staring at the words. He had heard of Sheridan's arrival. Of course, everyone had. New faces were rare in Brookhaven Estates. The HOA board liked to know exactly who was moving in, where they worked, what they drove, and how they kept their yard. But what unsettled Clifford wasn't the new homeowner herself. It was the tone of the message. He could tell the sender wasn't just curious. They were suspicious. By the next week, 2 more complaints arrived. One neighbor claimed Sheridan parked her car facing the wrong direction overnight. Another said she had too many packages dropped at her doorstep. Clifford knew these weren't violations worth serious attention, but he filed them anyway. Paper trails mattered at the monthly HOA meeting. In the clubhouse, the issue came up. Clifford tapped the stack of printed emails against the table while 6 other board members sat around sipping coffee. "We've had some notes about the new resident at 1432 Maple Glen," he began. His tone was casual, but his eyes scanned the room. To see who leaned forward, a woman named Patricia Nolan, treasurer of the HOA, pursed her lips. "That's the one with the early morning departures, right? I've noticed. Always leaving before sunrise, coming back after dark." Another board member, Ronald Pierce, shook his head. "Probably just works long hours. Why is that our business?" Patricia's voice sharpened. "Ronald, people are concerned. We have children playing outside. Strangers moving in and out at odd times. It unsettles folks." "She lives there alone," Clifford added. "No family, no kids, no spouse that I can see. Just her." A murmur rippled around the table. In a place like Brookhaven Estates, that was information. That mattered. People here liked neat categories: husbands, wives, kids, retirements. A single woman living alone didn't fit the picture. Ronald raised a hand. "What actual rule has she broken?" Patricia leaned forward. "Rules aren't the point. Perception is. When neighbors feel uneasy, it becomes our responsibility to address it." Clifford nodded slowly. He didn't need much convincing. He had made a career out of responding to concerns, even if those concerns were nothing more than gossip wrapped in polite language. "We'll keep an eye," he concluded. "Document anything unusual. If it continues, we'll decide on next steps." After the meeting, Clifford walked to his car, feeling the quiet buzz of authority settle in his chest. He liked being the person others turned to when something didn't fit. He wasn't just running an HOA. In his mind, he was safeguarding a standard. That evening, he drove past Sheridan's house. Her lights were on, shades drawn. Her car sat in the driveway, dust still on the tires from what looked like a long day. Clifford slowed, studying the home like an inspector. Nothing out of place. Yet he felt the pressure of those complaints like weight in his pocket. The next morning, Clifford received another message. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It was signed by Patricia herself. Saw her again at 5 a.m. heading out. No one with regular jobs leaves that early. People are talking. Clifford rubbed his temple. He told himself he wasn't acting out of prejudice. He told himself this was just due diligence. But deep down, he knew the truth. Sheridan's presence had stirred a discomfort in the neighborhood that had little to do with trash bins or parking rules. A few days later, Sheridan spotted Clifford, standing across the street with Patricia, clipboard in hand. They weren't subtle. They pointed at her driveway, scribbled notes, whispered. Sheridan, arms crossed, leaned against her car and watched them until they noticed. Neither waved. They simply walked away. That night, Sheridan called her friend and Deputy Rafael Ortiz, venting her frustration. "They're circling me like I'm some kind of suspect," she said. "You want me to pay them a visit?" "Drop a hint," Rafael asked, half joking. "No," Sheridan said. "That's exactly what they'd expect me to do. Throw my badge around. I just wanted a house, Raf. Just a place where I could drink coffee without someone clocking what time I walk out the door." There was silence on the line before Rafael said, "Sure. People like that don't need a reason. They'll invent one." Sheridan sighed. She knew he was right. Still, she hoped Clifford's clipboard would stay just that, a clipboard, not a weapon. But Clifford wasn't finished. The whispers in his ear were about to push him into making a call that would turn suspicion into confrontation by the second week. Sheridan had almost gotten used to the staring. Almost, she told herself, not to take it personally, but it wore on her. Every time she walked to her car before sunrise, she caught the faint glow of a neighbor's window. When she returned after long shifts, garage lights flicked on as though her presence had triggered alarms. So when she found the envelope taped to her front door one Thursday evening, she already had a sense of what it might be. She pulled it down, peeled the tape carefully, and read. Notice of violation. Trash receptacles may not be left in public view outside of scheduled collection hours. Please ensure compliance. Sheridan stared at the paper, lips parting in disbelief. Her bin had been on the curb for less than an hour after pickup. It was a minor detail, barely worth a reminder, let alone a formal violation notice. She walked inside and tossed the paper on the counter. "Guess the welcome basket's not coming," she muttered. Later that night, she called her older sister, Gwendolyn Tate, who lived in Jacksonville. Gwen had always been the one to give her blunt advice. "They gave you a violation for trash cans." Gwen asked, laughing bitterly. "Sherry, that's not about trash. That's about you." Sheridan leaned back in her chair, holding the phone against her ear. "I know, but the way they did it. No knock on the door, no conversation. Just paperwork taped to my house like I'm already guilty. You think Clifford sent it himself? Has to be. He's the one who came by on day one with his clipboard of rules." Gwen was quiet for a beat before saying, "Don't let them push you. You've fought tougher battles than this." "Yeah," Sheridan admitted, "but I can't arrest my neighbors for side-eye." The next morning, Sheridan noticed Clifford pacing near her yard as she loaded her car. She decided to address it directly. "Mr. Branson," she called out. Asterisk, he turned, plastering on a polite smile. "Miss Cole, everything all right?" "Gotcha." Notice, Clifford adjusted his glasses, feigning innocence. "Oh, those are standard. Nothing personal. It's just keeping the neighborhood consistent." Sheridan tilted her head. You mean to tell me you drove around after collection day and my house was the only one with a bin out? Clifford cleared his throat. Well, yours was most visible. Sheridan stepped closer, her tone even but sharp. Mr. Branson, I've been enforcing laws for 20 years. I know the difference between a rule and a target. Which one is this? 4A. Flicker of a second, Clifford's composure faltered, but he quickly recovered. Just the rules, Miss Cole. Nothing more. He tapped his clipboard and walked away as if his word ended the conversation. Sheridan watched him go, every muscle in her shoulders taut. That weekend, another envelope appeared. This one claimed her car tires had slightly touched the grass edge, which was a violation of property standards. Sheridan laughed when she read it, but there was no humor in the sound. By Monday, whispers around the block grew louder. While Sheridan unloaded groceries, she overheard Patricia Nolan speaking to another neighbor in her driveway. I told Clifford we can't ignore it. She comes and goes at all hours, doesn't even try to fit in. The other woman replied, You think she's renting? Maybe that's why she doesn't care. Sheridan slammed her trunk shut louder than necessary, making them both jump. She carried her bags inside without a word. That night, as Sheridan sat with paperwork spread across her table, her phone buzzed. It was Raphael. Sure, I'm hearing things, he said. What kind of things? Word around the neighborhood association is that calls are coming in about you. Some of them vague, some of them ... He paused. Some of them painting you like you're hiding something. Sheridan exhaled slowly. Hiding what? I've got a badge, a mortgage, and a bad back from moving boxes. What more do they need? Doesn't matter, Raphael replied. Once people decide you don't belong, they'll bend facts until they fit. Sheridan rubbed her forehead. She wanted to scream, but she knew her silence would say more than words ever could. The next day, another notice came. This one about lights. Left on too late at night. Sheridan crumpled it in her fist. She realized then that it wasn't about violations. It was about building a file. Clifford wasn't just keeping notes. He was building a case, line by line, waiting for the moment he could escalate. But Sheridan didn't know yet how far Clifford was willing to go, or how quickly the whispers would turn into a phone call that brought squad cars straight to her doorstep. The fourth notice arrived in Sheridan's mailbox on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly in the HOA envelope with Clifford's stamped signature at the bottom. This time, the violation claimed her mailbox needed repainting to meet community standards. Sheridan stared at the paper until her coffee went cold. The mailbox was less than 6 months old, spotless black enamel shining in the sun. She walked outside, looked at it, and shook her head. It was pristine. She knew then there wasn't even an attempt to disguise the harassment anymore. That evening, Sheridan parked her cruiser in her driveway after a long day at the sheriff's office. The flashing red and blue of her dash lights reflected against the garage door as she shut them off. She wanted the neighborhood to see it too, understand exactly who they were targeting. But within hours, Clifford's phone buzzed. Patricia Nolan's number lit up his screen. Cliff, she brought a squad car into the neighborhood. Patricia hissed. Do you think that's appropriate? People are nervous. It looks like she's trying to intimidate us. Clifford sat back in his recliner, sipping from a tumbler of bourbon. It's her work vehicle, he replied, though his tone was cautious. Still, it makes a statement. By the end of the week, Clifford had 3 more calls about Sheridan. One neighbor said they saw strangers visiting her house, though it was just Raphael dropping off takeout. Another complained about her porch light being too bright. And Patricia, always the most vocal, insisted Sheridan was creating a hostile atmosphere by glaring at people. Clifford gathered the complaints into a manila folder. He stared at the growing pile, uneasy but oddly satisfied. This was what he excelled at: documentation, structure, order. Yet, something inside him whispered that he was being used, that this wasn't about rules, but resentment. Still, he pressed forward. On Friday evening, Sheridan caught Clifford standing across the street again, phone in hand. She decided she was done with silent tolerance. "Mr. Branson," she called, crossing her lawn. "You got a problem with me?" Clifford lowered his phone. "Not at all, Ms. Cole. Just doing my duty as HOA president." "Funny," Sheridan shot back. "Your duty seems to start and end at my house." Clifford's smile was thin. "We hold everyone to the same standard." Sheridan took a step closer. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes locked on his. "Let me make something clear. I've lived a life where every decision I make gets scrutinized. I've walked into rooms where people thought they knew who I was before I even spoke, but I don't. Expect to deal with that when I'm home. So if you've got something to say it to my face, not through notices taped to my door." Clifford's throat bobbed, but he didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, tapping on his phone as he did. Inside her house, Sheridan paced the kitchen. She could feel the tension thickening like storm clouds gathering. The notices weren't about bins or lights or mailboxes. They were laying groundwork. She knew it. 2 nights later, at the HOA clubhouse, Clifford unfolded Sheridan's file on the table in front of the board. Patricia sat eagerly at his side, while the others looked uneasy. "We have a pattern," Clifford said, sliding the papers across. "Odd hours, repeated violations, confrontational attitude. I've had multiple residents tell me they feel unsafe." Ronald Pierce frowned, tapping the papers. "Unsafe. She hasn't done anything threatening." "You're stretching, Cliff." Patricia cut in. "Ronald, you didn't see the way she stormed across the lawn the other day? She has a temper. And the police career makes people think she's using her position to intimidate us." Another board member, Marjorie Hill, crossed her arms. "Or maybe she just works in law enforcement because that's exactly what she does." Clifford raised a hand. "Let's keep emotions out of this. The fact is, perception matters as much as reality. If enough residents feel alarmed, we can't ignore it." There was a pause before Patricia leaned in, her voice low and persuasive. "Cliff, if you won't act, someone else will. And if this community loses faith in the HOA, it reflects on you." Clifford stared at the file, his jaw tightened. He knew Patricia was pushing him, but the pressure worked. He had built his image around being the man who solved problems before they spread. In his mind, doing nothing wasn't an option. That night, Clifford sat in his car outside Sheridan's house, engine idling. He dialed a number he never thought he'd use for a neighbor. "Non-emergency dispatch," a voice answered. "Yes," Clifford said carefully. "I'd like to report some suspicious activity. In my neighborhood, a resident who's been causing concerns." As he gave the address, his stomach twisted. Asterisk, the following evening, a marked patrol car, followed by a second, turned onto Maple Glen Drive. They rolled to a silent stop in front of Sheridan's house. 2 deputies emerged, their faces professional and unreadable in the twilight. Before they could approach her door, it opened. Sheridan stood silhouetted in the doorway, not in her uniform, but in the same jeans and t-shirt from moving day. She held a glass of iced tea, her expression one of weary resignation. "Evening." "Sheriff," the lead deputy said, his voice tight with discomfort. "We got a call. A welfare check. Reports of suspicious activity at this address." From across the street, Clifford and Patricia watched from the shadow of Clifford's garage, their faces eager with vindication. Sheridan took a slow sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving her deputies. "Is that right?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Yes, ma'am." The caller expressed concerns about the occupant. A small, humorless smile touched her lips. She stepped fully onto the porch, letting the light from the house illuminate her. She looked past the deputies, her gaze finding Clifford and Patricia, who instinctively shrank back. "The occupant," she said, her voice projecting clearly across the quiet street, "is fine. She's the sheriff, and she's home." Let the words hang in the air. You can tell the caller that their concern has been noted, and that I will be paying very close attention to all non-emergency calls from this neighborhood from now on. Personally, the deputies nodded, understanding. The unspoken command, they returned to their car without another word, the message received. As the cruisers pulled away, Sheridan remained on her porch, a silent, formidable statue, watching over her street. The blinking of a curtain across the way was the only movement. The war wasn't over, but the first battle had been won. She finally turned and went inside, closing the door on the watching eyes. For the first time, the lock clicking shut sounded like peace.